Welcome back to Henry Felix Discourses. Today we'll be talking about Winsor School again and the global citizen. There's a part in the last one when I was talking about English where I forgot to read part of a screen that I wanted to read. So we'll finish that today. In fact, I'll go over that whole page again. And I think it's okay if something gets left out because CRT, DEI is a big subject. And if you're going to get into it, you really just have to do it a little bit at a time. So it's like eating an elephant. You do it one bite at a time. And if something gets left out one day, that's okay because you'll come back to it later. So today we will be doing that. I just want to review, if you'd like to get to the PDF that I'm using, how to get there, which is to look up Winsor School. Click on that. That'll take you to their homepage. Go up here to menu. Click on that. Go to About, and then down here to Equity Inclusion. Which takes you to this page. Scroll down. You get the DEI report. Click that. You get this page. Go down a little bit. Lift Every Voice is the name of the report. And click Read the Report. And a PDF will download for you. So, the page I'm referring to is this. Principles of Global Responsibility. The English department said that this is basically the main thing that they intend to support. So that has become the focus of the English curriculum of Winsor School. That's a change. That is new. It's not really normal. It's in support of something that is ideological, which I talked about last time. It's in support of a social movement. I think that's different from what English has been, and we don't have to keep to things just because they've always been that way, but because that's the most important thing about learning, is to appreciate English as an art form and a way to understand life and yourself. And they talk about a lot of that, but they also have a very strong social agenda. We covered how it is in service of this and DEI. DEI is the main topic, and that really confines English. So we'll just start by reading this over again, and we'll just do this page today. The Winsor School believes that a critical dimension of academic excellence in the 21st century is the preparation for responsible participation in the global community. Okay, so that's, anyway, what they intend to do. So part of this channel is just to talk about how if people are doubting that these things happen in the schools, it is happening. It's in black and white right here. The forces of globalization now ensure. Now, the forces of globalization is a funny term. What forces? Are we talking about coercive forces? Or are we talking about inevitable forces or natural forces? I think they like to portray it as natural forces, but I think there's also an element of coercion, and we'll see a little bit of that later. The forces of globalization now ensure that individuals and communities separated by vast geographic distances and cultural differences are increasingly interconnected and interdependent. Distant peoples and events shape local worlds, while at the same time, individual and community decisions made at Windsor, in Boston, or in New England often have an impact on wider social and ecological environments. So they're talking about the individual as part of a society. Whether that's bordering into whether the individual is less than society is a good question. Because in a free society like ours, the individual really has primacy. The individual is more important. Whereas in a society that's more conformist and perhaps even dictatorial, the community is more important. The state is more important than the individual. You're there to serve the state. So they're also talking about how we're a very interconnected world. And I did mention last time that the same idea was current in the pre-World War II world, where people thought everything was so interconnected there could not possibly be another war. And I think things can change. It was a good argument to say that because there was a lot of trade and we'd already been through a huge war, and it was inconceivable that we would go back to another war. And it would be in everyone's poor, bad interest to go to war, as it is all the time. But you never know. And look where we are now. We've got, Ukraine's going. That's a war right in Europe, and we're on the brink. I mean, it doesn't feel like it when you're there because it just sort of creeps along and gets a little more dangerous. But I think if a year or two ago, if we knew that we were going to be facing off against Russia right now and risking a nuclear war, the risk is there. I think we probably think that couldn't possibly happen. And here we are. Anyway, distant peoples and events shape local worlds, while at the same time, individual and community decisions made at Windsor, I read this already, but we'll just read it again, in Boston or in New England often have an impact on wider social and ecological environments. Ecological comes up because they're not just talking about society, they're also talking about the global environment. This is another reason to realize that this has to do with the UN 2030 agenda, where they want to eradicate poverty, and we talked about that last time about how poverty is being eradicated, and yet they still hang on to this idea that we must do something about that. Of course, we do, but we don't need to reorganize the entire world. What we're doing now is basically working. Poverty is going down precipitously, and why we need a huge change and to reorganize everything is, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. When we've got something that's making progress, why we would want to shift gears and go into a very collectivist kind of a world. In preparing its students to act responsibly in this interconnected and interdependent world, the Winsor School is committed to ensuring that its students not only understand the nature of globalization, but also appreciate the personal stakes and responsibilities they have as global citizens. So that's it. Here it is. I mean, you're going to be a global citizen now. Not an American, not an individual so much as a global citizen. So the English program is in support of this. This is the most important thing to the English program, to make people into global citizens. So that's the social agenda. And as I put it last time, especially when it talks about DEI being really the main topic of conversation, it does become indoctrination. The principles set forth below make explicit what we, as a diverse community of teachers and learners, believe global citizenship entails. They make 6 points. This is the part that I forgot last time. Now, 3 of these points are hard to argue with. And I'm not here to argue with anything, but I'm just reading it off and making commentary as it happens. But 3 of them are basically very good points. Then there's one that they kind of sneak in there, and this is very typical of a DEI, CRT thing that's been written, is that they give you some good ideas that you think, okay, I agree with that. Oh, that's good. Yeah, that sounds good too. And then you think, oh, really? In a way, maybe you're not listening anymore, or, they feel like they're sort of sneaking it in. And then they finish up with something that's a little more palatable too. So there really is a strong element of trying to sneak little things in. And I think we've had the experience with COVID, if I can say that, the COOF, that schools were getting away with a lot of stuff. They were doing a lot of things that parents didn't know about until they saw it happening on Zoom. And there was a lot of outrage about it. And rightly so, because they shouldn't have these political and social agendas in the classroom. I think the vast majority of parents agree that there should not be politics in the classroom. And there was, and there is, and they've really stepped on the gas in a lot of schools. Anyway, so let's just go through them. The first one is a commitment to pluralism, recognize the dignity of every individual, and value the diversity of human cultures. So they mention individual, and I think they do that in part because people like me will have our ears up saying, pluralism, really? Is that what it is? And they're saying, no, we're also here for the individual. In a way, you can have both, okay? But pluralism definitely de-emphasizes the individual. And the more you get into pluralism, the more you emphasize that, the closer it is to really collectivism, which is the opposite of individualism. That's where the individual is less important than the state and the culture and the community. Every individual has to be part of a community. There has to be that relationship. That's understood. But the American ideal, going back to Emerson and really that whole time period and coming from the Enlightenment, is that the individual is important. Your life, your ideas, your self-reification is important, and it is at least as important as the state. So in a way, I think when they talk about pluralism, when it's in a CRT, DEI context, they're moving in that direction. So do we want to have our eyes on individualism or on collectivism? Even if you can never reach either one, the direction that you're pushing means a lot about what kind of an education you'll have and what kind of life you'll lead and what kind of society you'll live in. Point number 2, strive for self-knowledge through the study of others. They seek to illuminate the core assumptions and values that define the student's own identity and cultural perspective while recognizing that the student's own worldview may not be universally shared. Well, of course. Yes, that's easy to agree with, basically. You learn a lot by studying others and learning about them and meeting them. It's a good point on the whole. Next is aspire to an empathetic understanding of others. They appreciate that other cultures, while profoundly different, are not incomprehensible, and that seeing the world from the perspective of others is the first step in identifying shared values that bridge the gaps of cultural, political, and religious difference. Definitely. When you travel, as Mark Twain said, it's the best cure for bigotry. When you travel, you find that other people are basically the same as we are. We all have the same general aspirations, to have a good life, to have some purpose in life, usually to raise a family, to be part of something that we're excited about. These are all things that we all are alike on. And you do learn that. You break down a lot of barriers through learning about other cultures. And you question your own culture and your own assumptions in a very positive way. You don't question them in the sense of saying, my culture's bad. You question them in terms of, well, where did this come from? What is valuable about my culture as well as what's valuable about their culture? That's the ideal. There is a strain with DEI and CRT of saying, what's wrong with my culture? What is wrong with us? That's a matter of emphasis. It's like having the different pole stars. If you want to be communicating with people and appreciate each other, that's one thing. And if there's an emphasis on criticizing yourself or putting yourself down, it's not really as much of a positive experience. I also noticed the word empathy here, the empathetic understanding of others. And it comes up again in this article. I'll just say something about that again later. Next is actively seek intercultural dialogue and engagement. They appreciate that the intellectual understanding of others is no substitute for cross-cultural conversations and meaningful relationships. So they're saying that book learning is not as valuable as experience, which is definitely true. Read a book about another culture and you can actually go to experience it. Ideally, you do both, but it doesn't really compare to reading a book, traveling, and meeting other people. Even if you're not traveling, but just meeting other people is something that will enrich you more than just reading a book. And it's really amazing what we can do with staying at home, just with YouTube and all the media that we have. You can learn a lot about other cultures just through that without even going there. Ideally, you do go there. But so anyway, I think we can all agree with that. That's a great point. Next is willing to act on behalf of social justice and human rights. So social justice, here's DEI words coming back in. They understand that respect and concern for human dignity requires, when necessary, strong action to preserve the welfare of others, and that active engagement in the affairs of others is best approached with empathetic understanding and a commitment to pluralism. So if we're going to interpret this in the most negative way possible, we'll start with that this time, instead of building it up first. I would say a strong reaction to preserve the welfare of others sounds a lot like doing things for your own good. We're doing this for your own good. That's one of the most threatening things that can ever happen. All dictatorships have done things for the good of the people and for your own good. And you may not like it, but you'll thank me in the end. Citizens don't have a parent-student relationship. and they shouldn't. And when people are saying that we're doing this for your safety, for your benefit, for your health, for your wellness, they're usually doing something for their own benefit. That's a lot what it sounds like. Strong action to preserve the welfare of others. Which others? Other countries? Are we talking about going to other countries and improving them? In that case, that's problematic because we've made a lot of mistakes with doing that in the past. And we probably shouldn't build ourselves up to thinking that we can and that, strong action is something that we need to preserve the welfare of others. It's treating people like babies. Right? That's the worst way you could put it. The best way is like, well, we're going to help you. I find it hard to really interpret that in a very good way. That's a way that we have the narcissist strain of the DEI person, then they would think they're the greatest person in the world for going out and taking strong action to preserve the welfare of others. Others would think of that as meddling. Anyway, second part of this. And that the active engagement in the affairs of others. Well, what was I just saying? The active engagement in the affairs of others is best approached with empathetic understanding and a commitment to pluralism. So we'll be nice. Here, I think I mentioned it before. You got the knife in there and you're going to twist it with a smile. We are empathetic. We have a commitment to pluralism while we engage in the affairs of others. I'm not sure I like this point. I don't like this point. I think this is something that we did. I don't like any part of it, really. I think you can even go to people who've been to the Peace Corps, and I've met people and I've heard of people who don't really have a great assessment of their experience with the Peace Corps because they go and they find that they've not really accomplished anything. They show up. I mean, some of the stories are funny. There was one about, this wasn't this particular one. This was from a TED Talk where somebody had been, was in Africa, I think, and they were showing them how to grow tomatoes. And the people were doing it. They were like, okay, we'll grow the tomatoes here. And they were saying, these tomatoes are incredible. They're huge. It's going to feed the entire town. And then one day the hippopotamuses came out and ate all the tomatoes. And the person said, well, why didn't you tell us? And they said, well, nobody asked. You were paying us to go out to the hillside and plant tomatoes, so we did it. And he was saying you have to really engage with people to know whether you're helping. And it's not that's a microcosm of what can really go wrong. Other examples are things like giving clothes away. You can send old clothes to an African country, and this is from a report I saw, and I can't think of the actual country, but it happens everywhere. It's really the same story. You see it over and over again throughout the world in poor areas. You come in with a lot of clothes, and people wear those clothes, and they're happy to get them. But then the people who actually make clothes, which is a big part of that society and that economy at the level where they are, have no work. So then they can't work. And then everybody's just completely dependent on the Western world coming in and just shipping in their spare goods that nobody wants anymore. And that's a really weird situation. So that's a little bit of rambling, but let's just look at that again. Just think about the person who's thinking that this is the greatest thing in the world. We have respect and concern when we take strong action to preserve the welfare of others, and that active engagement in the affairs of others is best approached with empathetic understanding. I just think the more you think about that, the worse it sounds. Empathetic, I wanted to just mention that word because it's like a step up from sympathy. I don't think it fits the situation, but when you have sympathy for someone, you feel bad for them. You see the situation, you understand it, and you feel bad. Empathy is feeling with the other person, is having the same feelings as the other person. That's actually a very strong statement to be making. To me, I think it's a product of in-group competition, where having sympathy for the poor is good. So having empathy for the poor must be better. Because while you understand their situation, I really feel for their situation. It happens in every group, every single group that's ever formed, really. If they have a mission, people will try to top everybody else and do it a little bit better, a little bit stronger. These are the things that turn out to be Calvinism, for example, in our history. But it can apply to anything. It can apply to a fraternity where hazing comes from, probably 100 years ago, there might have been, well, you sit down and have a shot with everybody, and then you're in the fraternity. That's like the last thing you do in the ceremony or something. And then that turns into a six-pack, and then 60 years later, people are chugging entire bottles of vodka upside down, that kind of thing. And it's a gradual increase. So sympathy, empathy, I think that's already too much, because I don't think you can feel empathy for somebody in a completely different culture and has a totally different experience and has problems that you've never experienced. I think it's a way of showing off a little bit that you are really the one with the most sympathy, because it's become empathy. So maybe that's just sniping. Maybe that's being a little too critical, but I think we've seen that enough. When you read this PDF, you'll see the word empathy all over the place. And I think it's one of these things that if you haven't really thought about that too much before, I think you're going to start hearing it a lot. You're going to start saying, yeah, empathy. I just heard that again. Why empathy? Why aren't they using the word sympathy here? Why is it always empathy? Do they really mean empathy? And can they mean empathy? If you do have empathy, if you're so strongly understanding of others that you actually feel with them, then it kind of gives you that right to take strong action and actively engage in the affairs of others. How often do you want your neighbors actively engaging in your affairs? So I'll lay off. I think I've made my point with that. Last one, act as a steward for the natural environment. They appreciate the degree to which human beings depend on and in turn affect the natural environment and act to sustain the diversity of the ecological world. So it also has a very strong environmental aspect to it, the 2030 agenda, and so does this. It's hard to see really how that fits in with an English curriculum at a high school. I just don't see why they're so intent on putting this into every part of school life. I mean, I do understand it because it's a very ideological movement. And there's no room for other thoughts. And they want to make sure that it's just the entire experience is replete with DEI. They think it's that important, but it also leaves you with no escape from it. It's a very confining and a very suffocating environment when you've got essentially what amounts to a new religion seeping its way into every part of your life. And that's where the individual starts to get crushed. And if they say, well, it's in the name of pluralism, well, your society is more important than you are. You're just going to have to conform and deal with it. Sustaining the diversity of the ecological world. Sustain is a word I'll come back to later, but when they say sustain, we know what sustain means, but it has a little extra meaning when it comes to CRT and DEI. And this is really because CRT is part of critical theory. So the history of it is that you have critical theory, which has its own history, but we'll just start there. We have critical theory, and then that becomes critical race theory, which then becomes DEI, which is critical race theory in practice. Just to sum it up like that. And sustain has very much of a very communal and Marxist flavor to it. And taken to its extreme, it's a little bit like Pol Pot, where everybody should just be living off the land as a farmer. They don't believe in growth. They don't believe in development. And I think that's a huge mistake. And I think that's part of why when we looked at 2030 agenda in the last one, where they were talking about global poverty as the number one problem in the world, they need that to be the problem because they consider growth to be something that's not working. So they need to, when they see poverty going down, in a way they don't like to see that. It's much the same way that in the 30s and earlier, communists were disappointed that the rest of the world was actually doing very well under capitalism. They wanted to see that revolution. They were upset that it didn't happen. They never let go of the idea that you should have that kind of a communal environment and communal society. So sustain has a little bit more of a meaning than just what we would normally think of as sustain. So when I see sustain, I think of my front yard, because I don't have grass in my front yard. It's all plants that live in the natural environment, and they don't really need to be maintained. They just kind of live and die, and they can just fall over, and you don't have to rake them out. Nothing. Once in a while, you have to go sort of cut it back a little bit if you want it to look okay, but there's really nothing you need to do. To me, that's what sustainable is. For example, something that takes care of itself. They're talking about a world that basically doesn't need. It's hard to say sometimes what they mean, but there's an anti technological bent to this, where they want everything to be right down to the basic level. We'll come back to that, but I just wanted to kind of leave that out there a little bit. Sustain means a little bit more than we always think it would mean. So, affect the natural environment and to sustain the diversity of the ecological world. I mean, that taken on its own is a great thing. We want to maintain the species diversity and so forth. But there's a little bit more lurking behind that. So anyway, that's what the agenda is here for Principles of Global Responsibility. They have a number of things. At some point, we'll speed this whole thing up, and I'll start covering a little bit faster some of their other things that they're talking about, principles of diversity and so forth. We'll notice the same themes coming back again and again and again and again. It's a little bit polemic in that sense, because you hear the same words, the same thing. Everything is supposed to follow the same pattern. So I think we'll wrap it up there, and I hope you enjoyed that. I'm enjoying all of this anyway. I love doing this. I'm so glad that we have something like Rumble and YouTube where people can get out there and say a few words, because much as people may criticize YouTube, it's a heck of a lot better than you would have seen in 1980. Just think about the idea of somebody saying, well, I really think the TV station should let everybody have a channel, and they can go on and talk, and if anybody wants to watch, they can watch. It's amazing. So there are things that people complain about, but we've come a long way, and there's nothing better than hearing people's different voices and hearing a variety of opinion. And I hope that my opinion has informed you a little bit. I'm not expecting to be the be-all and end-all for anybody. And again, if you have enjoyed what you heard, please give me a thumbs up. If you don't, please give me a thumbs down. That's valuable feedback as well. And if you want to write something, I'd be happy to hear from you on any topic. And I hope to have you back next time.